Chapter 8 deals with intrigue, and I would consider this like the social combat system for this game. We've talked in part about role-playing versus rolling the dice, ROLL playing. And to be honest, this section of this book has made me maybe reconsider my past opinions a little bit. It is kind of involved, but at the same time, there feels like there's weight to the words. And because you're playing in a setting where politics can be just as deadly as combat, it makes me reconsider my previous thoughts on this. Now, as we go through the process that intrigue is, and the different terms for things, it can be a little confusing at times. So if you're going to use this system instead of just role-playing your character and just with the words and the way you act, I would suggest having little things along the way to help your players out, maybe cards with the various options they can use so that they can go through maybe different decks of cards for different options. And that way I think it would speed this process up a little bit. Intrigues are broken down into exchanges, which last an amount of time set by the GM. Each side of the intrigue gets to roll ability tests to try to sway the outcome of the conversation, diplomacy, whatever you're trying to do. Role-playing is also said to be a part of this. By gaining influence, you reduce your composure, which are much like social hit points. So if you think of composure, social hit points, that should keep it straight in your head. When you get to 0 composure, you lose the conflict, and you basically submit to the other side of the argument. You lose. Whatever they want you to do, you will do, etc. Intrigues can be one exchange or many. And as I was trying to say before, even though this does put a little bit more mechanical weight to the social thing that you're doing, I suggest that role-playing, R-O-L-E, be a part of this, and the GMs give bonuses and penalties for arguments that don't really make sense, or if they flub anything up, break any taboos, etc. Intrigue defense is formed from multiple abilities, so you will realize that you need multiple ranks and multiple abilities to be good at this intrigue defense. You only need this intrigue structure, with the various stages and steps, if role-playing alone doesn't cut it. If you come to some discussion that can't be resolved, or you can't make headway between one kingdom and another, that's when you would use this. And depending on your group, if you like more crunchy mechanics and such, you might use this system more. But if you like to get into character and you want to act out your character's emotions and words, then you will probably use this system less. But with anything in RPGs, if you don't like the system, you can ignore it and just do your own thing. There are various stages or steps to this intrigue process, and I'm going to go through and try to just go over the basics of each one. But if you're running this intrigue and using this system, I would suggest having this outline beside you, or make your own outline. And like I said, maybe some cards or something to help the players figure out what their options are. I would suggest maybe 3x5 cards. Maybe give each one their own deck. And you can even print them out on like sticker paper and just slap it on a 3x5 card. But the first stage or step is type, and you have 3 different types. You can have a simple, standard, or complex intrigue. A simple one might be like a lord versus the small folk, seducing a woman that loves you. It has like short-term consequences, and it's a single exchange. So you try to influence them, they try to resist or influence back, maybe making a counteroffer, etc. A standard type is 2 or more participants, and there's multiple exchanges. So you're rolling, your dice to try to influence them. They're defending and trying to even make counteroffers, and then you're gonna roll again. So there could be 3, 4, 5, even more exchanges. If you think of an exchange as a swinging of the sword, if the sword is made out of words, then you kind of get the idea of what this is like. There are several conflict tests, and these usually have long-term consequences. A bunch of standard exchanges basically build on top of one another. If each exchange is a battle, then the complex intrigue is the war. So exchange is the battle, the intrigue is the war. So again, this is where the terms, you have to kind of keep them in mind. So exchange is you attacking with your words, and the intrigue is just the whole process. It depends on how many times you need to state your argument, restate your argument, and make your points. And let's see, what the complex intrigues are a little bit more tricky. They have far-reaching consequences. They can have several major NPCs or characters participating. The outcome is very dangerous. There's numerous conflict tests. They require a certain number of victory points. And here's another term. You get a victory point for every successful intrigue that you gain a point in. So you have to kind of keep track of how well you're doing, how many times you reduce their composure to 0. That's their social hit points. The GM decides how many victory points are needed to achieve your goal. So this might be over in-game, a period of weeks, or maybe your kingdom is trying to negotiate an alliance with another kingdom, and not kingdom, but different lands, and you're trying to figure out the best way possible to go about doing it. The second step of an intrigue is the scene. That's the location and the participants that are involved in it. Location can give bonuses or negatives to the overall rolls. Let's say you're having a debate or something in the Godswood or in a Septon's Hall. Some of those things might give bonus dice to different things, and depending on how the GM wants to do it, they could perhaps benefit one side versus the other. Most intrigues happen between 2 participants, and extra NPCs can give bonuses as well. Maybe they're supporting the people that they support. They might not necessarily engage in the intrigue, but just them being there, them giving their support, kind of like your dad showing up to your soccer game or something. The third step of an intrigue is the objective, or what do you hope to achieve from this social combat. Suggested objectives are friendship, information, service, and deceit. And those are just to name a few, but even in these 4 categories, they have lots of suggestions on what friendship could mean. It could mean trying to bed somebody or trying to win an alliance, and you can have more different types. That basically, what do you want to achieve if you win this, and if you lose, what are going to be the consequences of that? The fourth step of an intrigue is disposition, and this is the view that your friends or enemies have of you, and the view that you have of your friends or enemies. And these can greatly affect exchanges. The neutral ground is indifferent, and there's varying levels of friendship and hatred. All of them give like a social damage reduction, and these prevent damage done to your composure or your social hit points. There are modifiers to deception or persuasion, depending on how you are actually going about doing it. Characters should keep track of what current dispositions they have towards NPCs that they're going to bump into. The default first disposition you have is indifferent if you don't have any opinion of them. But you might have an opinion of them depending on what their outlook is on life, what you've heard of them, maybe you've heard something about their honor that you don't care much about. So reputation can also affect your character's view of other people. If you've heard nasty things about the Lannisters, maybe you have you're more reserved. You're not indifferent. You're like, oh, I don't know, it's a Lannister, I better watch what I say. So those are things you need to think about. I've heard one YouTube subscriber that talked about this system already on the comments in my previous videos, and he said that the DR against social combat is a little high, and sometimes, especially if you didn't like the person, it was really hard to win the argument and get their composure down to 0. So maybe as a house rule, you would reduce these DRs by half and round down, just as a suggestion. So indifferent is where you usually start out with. But you can select a different one if you think they would have different ones, like I said. There are 7 in total, and indifferent is sort of in the middle. Dispositions by circumstance can modify starting dispositions. Like I said, if you think they aren't honorable or you don't trust them. Things like having a good reputation or being attractive can move it, and everyone moves it up a step or down a step. Status tests can be made to see how widely known you are. So maybe they know more about you, what you're like, what your thoughts are, what your character is. You can modify up or down one step your disposition after each exchange. So even if you start out as indifferent, if someone's being a jerk to you, you're not going to keep the same indifferent attitude. You can't lower it, however, if you were successfully influenced by the last exchange. So if you lost the last exchange, you can't modify. You're still indifferent because they were successful in motivating you, influencing you. And that could be even against your wishes, but maybe you're like, oh, well, maybe, Cersei Lannister, she looks great in that shirt. Maybe I should sit around here longer and listen to more of what she has to say. Step 5 is initiative, and this is based off of status. And this is, again, it's just showing you how important status is. It's a status test plus bonus dice from reputation. You go from the highest to the lowest, unless someone wants to hold their action and wait till later. So again, this is, if you get the feeling that this is kind of like combat, I think that's what they were trying to go with here, where this is using words as weapons, and sometimes words can actually be deadlier than weapons. Step 6 of intrigue is techniques, and these are the actual weapons that you're using. Depending on the ways you present your points, you can gain more influence and reduce their composure. Those are the social hit points again. Each technique is described in greater detail, and each one lists the consequences of defeat if you're using that weapon to make your points. Damage is normally a rank in an ability, so persuasion, for instance, times your degree of success. So if you roll really high, you could probably do a lot of damage to them. They do get to reduce that damage by their dispositions that have DR. So keep that in mind. Step 7 is the actual role-playing between you and the other NPC, or you and multiple NPCs. This can also involve other PCs as well. Depending on what kind of game you're running, if each of you are running your own house, then you would definitely be using this against them. This is where the GM, I feel, should really give bonuses or negatives depending on what is actually said, and perhaps even the other players might suggest, like, hey man, what you just said is going to drive my character crazy, so you really messed up there. And again, it's a role-playing game. I feel there really should be role-playing in it, but if you're the kind of group that doesn't like to get into character, you could probably just skip this step. Okay, step 8 is actions and tests. Now, this might get a little confusing with techniques, but this is actually what you're trying to accomplish. So the various suggested actions are assist, consider, fast talk, influence, manipulate, mollify, quit, read target. You can use one that's called shield of reputation. You can switch to combat. You literally just say, screw this, I'm going to hit you in the face with a sword, and you can withdraw. So each one has its benefits and consequences for using them, so you really need to look into it. And again, this is where I think having some cards in front of the players would help, because they can just look through the various options really quickly by going through their deck. And I just think that would help out well. That's just the one thing that popped in my head when I was reading through these rules. If they win the exchange, an influence in excess of your disposition rating, again, that's your social DR, is how much composure you lose. And at 0 composure, you have been influenced, whatever that influence is, depending on what the other character wanted you to do or do for them. Frustration reduces influence, but future exchanges have a -1 die penalty on deception and persuasion tests. So this is an option. Instead of losing those social hit points, instead of losing composure, you can give yourself a negative in the future. So this is where it gets a little tricky. It's like, oh, okay, wait a minute. So instead of okay, I took off my DR and I'm going to take this many social hit points, but instead of that, I can take this negative to the future arguments. So you see how you're still, being influenced, and you're still, losing the argument a little bit, but it's in a different way. So if you just think about it, you can have negatives, you can have negative die penalties, and your social hit points can be going down. These are all different ways of manipulating the argument and trying to win in your favor. So some tactics could be involved here as far as what you want to do, how you want to go about doing it, and if you're losing, how are you losing, in what mechanical way. If your frustration dice penalty exceeds your will ability, you also lose. So this is like another way that your opponent can beat you into submission. You might still have your social hit points, but if these equal, your ability, then your will ability, you're done too. You can yield on your turn with a compromise deal, but the other opponent has to agree to it. So instead of being beaten into submission, which isn't very good for anyone's pride, you can say, you know what, okay, you're making some good arguments here. And anyone who's been married or in a relationship understands what compromise is. No one's happy. But if you make this compromise, you come out of it looking a little bit, more respectful, and it's just something to consider. It's a valuable option. Instead of losing or winning every argument, you can, basically just ride the middle ground a little bit and say, okay, I'm going to take this thing back that I wanted, but, okay, I'll give that up, but I want you to get rid of this thing. And then that's some sort of compromise we can come to. You can use destiny points to modify your opponent's victory over you with the GM's permission. And step 9 is just to repeat this. This is just one exchange that we've gone through. So you will do this over and over again until their social hit points, their composure is reduced to 0, and then you win. Or your social hit points are reduced to 0, and then you lose. Or again, you get this frustration where if it gets your will rank, you've lost that too. So that's pretty much how it works. There's the next step, however, we'll talk about resolution. Okay, so you've had one exchange or multiple exchanges, and eventually either you've compromised or one person has beat their ideas or their wants and wishes onto someone, into somebody else. The techniques used during the intrigue and the disposition of the opponent affects the outcome. So you need to look at those. Look at the techniques used for guidance. Now remember, the techniques are like the weapons of this combat. Intrigue should not replace all role-playing and shouldn't be used for minor social conflicts. If the status rank is equal to or greater than the target's DR, you can normally bypass this system. So again, this just shows you that having noble blood, being a lord of a house, has lots of benefits to it. So do not neglect your status ability, unless you think that would be interesting to roleplay. You would be putting yourself at a disadvantage, but I tend to like to play disadvantaged characters, so, as you will. So yeah, you can normally bypass these intrigue rules and just straight up influence them without any dice rolls or anything. So it's like, I have high status, you're beneath me, you're one of the small folk, do what I say. The example in this book helps put this all together. You can read through and how each step works and what happens afterwards. Yes, they probably could have more examples, but they probably didn't want to make the book any longer. Thoughts on intrigues. Just what do I think of this whole process? It would very much help each player to have a book so that they can look at all of these techniques, dispositions, actions. But if that's not possible, like I said, I suggest 3x5 cards. Just GM to take, maybe like an afternoon and print them all out or make them up for them. And I think that would really help the players get used to it, and I think it would help you be able to run it a little bit smoother. Let's see here. I would think the objectives, dispositions, techniques, and actions would be great for these cards, because that's lots of different options that could be right in the palm of their hands. And I would suggest putting the mechanical benefits and consequences for all of these options. And again, so when I started out, before reading this book, I am very much in the role-playing camp versus, rolling dice. After reading this, though, it's got me kind of intrigued. I see the weight behind this, and the options that are given feel like a debate. They feel like diplomacy, and even some of them have that nasty edge to them. I'd really have to play test this out, I think, to see how it worked, see if that DR, social DR, is a problem or not, if I need to house rule that. So what's really cool about this game is it's got me rethinking some of my positions, some of my thoughts and opinions in role-playing in general. I still lean heavily to the role-playing side of things, but it kind of notched me back over to maybe like the middle a little bit more. So that was kind of interesting. I'm going to finish this video up here, and I should be able to get through this series in one more video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you there.